The tension in Los Angeles had been building for months, a slow-burning flame that no one in the Forrester or Logan circles could ignore, despite numerous attempts. Sheila Carter, formerly the most dreaded name in town, had battled her way back to a semblance of normalcy, or as close to it as she could manage. Married to Deacon Sharp and co-owner of Il Giardino, she carried herself with a newfound confidence, as if she had finally defeated the odds. Her prior misdeeds, the shootings, the manipulations, the dead she left behind, all felt remote now, like stories told about someone else. She credits Taylor Hayes for much of it. When Deacon's attention drifted, the psychiatrist listened, offered advice, and assisted Sheila in navigating the precarious restoration of her marriage. Taylor became Sheila's surprising ally, a woman who knew sorrow and redemption in ways few people did. Taylor, for her part, struggled with guilt whenever she saw Sheila's thankful smile. The sessions had begun innocently enough, with Sheila discussing her insecurities, Deacon's distractions, and her worry of not being enough. Taylor listened, nodded, and recommended ways to reconnect. But sometime along the way, the lines blurred. Deacon began coming up for his own consultations, which ranged from marital counsel to something considerably more personal. He talked about regrets, what could have been, and a life if he hadn't followed the path that brought him to Sheila. Taylor attempted to steer him back, reminding him of his vows and the security he had fought for. However, each meeting weakened her resolve. She felt recognized in ways she hadn't since Ridge, understood in her loneliness and the never-ending cycle of heartbreak. The night began softly. Deacon and Taylor found themselves alone at Il Giardino after the restaurant had closed. The lights darkened, and the aroma of garlic and wine lingered in the air. What began as a talk about Sheila's improvement evolved into confessions neither of them had intended to make. Words tumbled out. Admiration, longing, confessions that neither could retract. They kissed tentatively at first, then desperately, as if years of restraint had finally broken. They didn't go any further that night, but the harm had been done. The spark ignited something that neither could extinguish. Sheila saw the shift almost immediately. Deacon arrived home later than usual, his mood upbeat and his touches unfocused. She initially put it up to work, but suspicions crept in like shadows lengthening at dark. She studied him more closely, noting how his eyes shifted when she mentioned Taylor, and the tiny smiles he tried to cover when his phone chimed with a message he claimed was from a supplier. Sheila's intellect, always alert and wary, began to piece together parts. She remembered her own warning to Taylor months before, half in fun and half deadly serious. If Deacon ever strayed, especially with a good doctor, there would be consequences. At the moment it seemed like bravado. Now it felt like a prophecy. The confrontation occurred on a crisp afternoon. Sheila walked into Taylor's office uninvited, bashing the door against the wall. Taylor looked up from her desk, startled, and her heart sank as she saw Sheila's expression, not wrath, but something colder, more controlled. Sheila slammed the door behind her and leaned against it, arms crossed. "I need to talk to you," she continued, her voice low. Taylor gestured toward the chair, but Sheila stayed standing. She talked about her marriage and the renewed desire she felt, thanking Taylor gratefully for her aid. But her gaze never left Taylor's face, searching for fissures. "You saved us," Sheila explained. "I owe you everything." The words were heavy, filled with an unsaid menace. Taylor swallowed, trying to remain cool. She apologized if anything had been misconstrued and stressed that her only purpose had been to help. Sheila nodded carefully, as if pondering. Then she leaned forwards. "But if something were to change, if someone were to interfere, I wouldn't hesitate. You know my history." Taylor's pulse was rapid. She knew. Everybody knew. Sheila had shot Steffi and nearly killed Finn, leaving a trail of destruction. The reformed Sheila was only a thin veneer on the woman who formerly thrived on vengeance. Days passed in uncomfortable stillness. Taylor tried to break away from Deacon, telling him they needed to stop because the risk was too large. He agreed in words, but his actions conveyed a different narrative. He contacted her late at night, called her when Sheila was out, and made excuses to meet. Each interaction fueled the flames, making an explosion inevitable. Sheila's realization was awful. She strolled into Il Giardino one evening, intending to surprise Deacon with dinner. Instead, she discovered him and Taylor in the back room, arms around each other, lips locked in an unmistakable kiss. Sheila's tray plummeted to the floor, smashing plates and glasses. Time stopped. Deacon drew back, eyes wide with dread. Taylor took a step back, hands up as if to defend against an attack. Sheila remained immobile, her face pale, and suddenly flushed with wrath. "You," Sheila muttered, pointing to Taylor. "After everything." Her voice raised. "I trusted you. I thanked you, and this is how you repay me." Deacon stood between them, imploring. "Sheila, wait, it's not what you think." But that's precisely what she thought. The betrayal went deeper than any knife. Sheila's hands shook. She grabbed into her pocket, fingers locking around the little pistol she usually carried, a habit from her darker days that she had never entirely broken. Taylor noticed the movement, the glimmer of metal. She backed toward the door, her voice wavering. "Sheila, please. We can talk about this." But Sheila's eyes were frigid, the same dead calm she wore when she shot Steffi years ago. "Talk," she repeated. "There's nothing else to say." She raised the rifle and pointed it straight at Taylor's chest. Deacon lunged. "No." He grabbed Sheila's arm and twisted it up. The gun fired, the sound loud in the small room, and the bullet embedded in the ceiling. Plaster poured down. Taylor screamed and fell to the floor. Sheila fought Deacon, claws scraping his face, fueled by hatred. "She took you from me," she exclaimed. "She ruined everything." Deacon dragged her down, trapping her arms and sending the gun skittering across the floor. Taylor scrambled for it and kicked it further away. Sheila bucked beneath him, tears flowing down her cheeks, mingling fury and anguish. "I was finally happy," she cried. "You took it away." Her voice broke. "I was going to kill her. I was really going to do it." The words hung in the air, raw and honest. Sheila ceased resisting, and her body went limp. Deacon hugged her, whispering apologies that seemed empty even to him. Taylor stood against the wall, breathing heavily, staring at the lady who had nearly killed her. Sirens sounded in the distance. Someone in the restaurant had phoned the cops. In the aftermath, the city was abuzz. Sheila was arrested, but charges were complicated by Deacon's intervention and her brief display of sorrow. Taylor fled, wondering every action that had led up to this moment. Deacon felt guilty, split between the woman he loved and the one he had betrayed. The Forrester and Logan families banded together, protecting their own while gossiping about Sheila's impending return to villainy. However, something changed in Sheila during those hours of holding. The wrath subsided, leaving just emptiness. She stared at the wall, recreating the moment she lost control, the moment the pistol appeared and the decision was made in an instant. She was so close to wrecking everything again, proving the world right about her irredeemability. But she had not pulled the trigger. Not exactly. Deacon's intervention, her own hesitancy, the sound of sirens, something stopped her. Taylor made one visit against advice. Their eyes met through the glass wall. There were no words at first. Then Taylor spoke quietly. "I never wanted this." Sheila looked up, her face tired. "I know. But I did. For a second I really did." She looked at her watch. "I lost control. Completely. I was going to kill you." The admission came without argument, simply the reality. Taylor nodded. "But you didn't." Sheila laughed bitterly. "Only because he stopped me. And maybe because part of me remembered who I was trying to be." She was leaning closer. "Tell Deacon, tell him I'm sorry for everything." The narrative did not end there. Soap operas seldom do. Sheila faced court, treatment, and the long road back, assuming there was one. Taylor bore obvious and invisible scars, raising questions about her participation in setting off the fuse. Deacon carried the weight of decisions that wounded everyone he cared about. The triangle that threatened murder became a cautionary story in Los Angeles circles. Love could heal, but it could also destroy when old wounds met new betrayals. Weeks stretched into months. Sheila, who had been released on bail pending trial, remained quiet, staying away from Il Giardino and the spotlight. She wandered the beaches alone, feeling the tug of her past and a fleeting yearning for something different. She thought of Taylor frequently, not with hatred, but with a peculiar reverence. The woman had overcome her worst impulse. That meant something. Taylor continued sessions, more careful and watchful. She ignored Deacon and the restaurant, focusing on healing her own heart. She couldn't forget Sheila's eyes on that last visit, the raw vulnerability beneath the monster everyone expected. Deacon attempted to reconstruct, but the cracks remained. He went to see Sheila, and sat in quiet at times, but also talked about forgiveness and starting over. She listened and said little. The future was uncertain, tangled up in court battles, public opinion, and personal atonement. Ultimately, Sheila's loss of control characterized them all. It reminded Los Angeles that darkness never truly disappears, that trust is fragile, and that a single moment of wrath may erase years of work. However, it demonstrated that even in the depths of rage, a sliver of restraint may transform everything. Sheila had not killed Taylor, and that, perhaps, was the start of something no one expected. Not redemption itself, but the prospect of it. The city moved on, with dramas transferring to new people and controversies. But at quiet moments, those who understood the story remembered. Sheila had lost control and was going to kill Taylor. But she didn't. That solitary fact repeated, a thread in an endless tapestry of lives interwoven by love, betrayal, and the fine edge between salvation and destruction. Sheila had always been a woman consumed by obsession, passion, and a frightening notion of justice that existed just in her mind. For years, those around her had discovered that when she felt threatened or deceived, she became unpredictable. But lately, something inside her had changed. The wrath that had previously simmered quietly beneath the surface was now boiling, ready to spill over at any moment. Taylor had no idea how close she was to becoming the target of Sheila's fury. It began as a succession of minor irritations that Sheila tried to overlook. She persuaded herself she could be calm and keep the small serenity she had managed to create. But every time she saw Taylor standing proudly with the people Sheila desired in her life, it felt like another door had slammed shut. Sheila observed things from a distance. Taylor felt at ease and safe in the role she had created for herself. She was revered, admired, and trusted by many who had before doubted Sheila. The contrast was like fire in Sheila's chest. Taylor saw life as usual. She thought the tension between them had faded into the background. There had been problems in the past, of course, but she assumed those storms had passed. She was wrong. Sheila's thoughts began to turn darker. Every exchange she overheard, every time Taylor received praise or affection, fanned the fire that was building inside her thoughts. Sheila began to believe that Taylor was to blame for her long-term suffering. It didn't matter if the belief was rational or not. Sheila's mind had accepted it as fact. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became to her. Taylor had always been an impediment, standing between Sheila and the life she thought she deserved. One evening, when Sheila sat alone in the dark light of her living room, the silence was oppressive. She replayed memories over and over. Faces. Words. She experienced moments of rejection or humiliation. Every time those memories returned, Taylor's face seemed to appear in the center. Her hands trembled as she grabbed the chair's arm. "This is her fault," Sheila said quietly to herself. The statements seemed weird at first, but as she repeated them, they began to feel more genuine. The outside world went on as usual. Cars drove by, neighbors walked down the street, and music flowed into the night. Something darker was growing inside Sheila's house. Sheila became increasingly aware of Taylor's actions. At first, it was subtle. She positioned herself in areas where she knew Taylor may pass. She focused on routines, habits, and schedules. She learned when Taylor typically arrived at specific locations, when she left, and who she encountered along the route. Every detail mattered. Sheila told herself she was just being cautious, protecting herself from someone who had harmed her. But deep inside, Another thought was developing. A concept that terrified her at first. Could removing Taylor from the equation be the only solution to alleviate the pain? The thought stuck in her thoughts for days. She attempted to shove it away. She reminded herself of the ramifications, the turmoil that would ensue. But the rage always returned, stronger than before. Sheila felt her chest constrict every time Taylor smiled in public or someone complimented her kindness or cleverness. It was unfair. That phrase echoed incessantly in her mind. It wasn't fair that Taylor had everything. It seemed unfair that Sheila was always compelled to stand on the outside. One afternoon, Sheila happened to notice Taylor smiling with his friends. The moment should have meant nothing. But for Sheila, it felt like a personal attack. She stared from across the room, her gaze riveted on Taylor's face. Everyone appeared so calm around her, so trustworthy. That trust made Sheila feel even more insignificant. And then the thought returned, stronger than ever. Everything would change if Taylor left. People would eventually see things differently. Sheila sensed a peculiar serenity flood over her. Her mind's confusion gradually organized itself into a single, terrible idea. She stood up carefully and approached the window. Outside, the evening sun threw lengthy shadows on the roadway. Sheila's reflection gazed back at her in the glass. For a brief period, she couldn't identify the lady looking back. Her demeanor had hardened, and her eyes were filled with a determination that scared even her. Sheila closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the thought was still present. And this time, she didn't push it aside. Days passed, yet the thought persisted. Instead, it became more detailed. Sheila began thinking many scenarios. Where it could occur. When it might happen. How could she escape being seen? Each idea made the scenario seem more genuine. More is conceivable. Meanwhile, Taylor lived her life utterly oblivious. She spent time assisting others, focused on her work, and maintaining the relationships that were important to her. The last thing she expected was that someone was secretly preparing something dreadful. Sheila tried to convince herself that what she was thinking was not wrong. She reminded herself that extreme issues deserved extreme answers. Even as she reflected on these thoughts, a small voice inside her warned her that she was crossing a line that could never be crossed again. However, the rage blocked out that voice. Late one night, Sheila found herself standing in the dark, peering out at the silent street. Her heart was pumping quicker than normal. She reflected on all that had transpired throughout her life. All the betrayals. All the while, she felt abandoned. Taylor had become a metaphor for all of these things in her thoughts. Sheila felt that symbols could be eliminated. Her breath slowed as she concentrated on that concept. If Taylor disappeared, the past could finally stop haunting her. Perhaps the agony would subside. Perhaps people would finally comprehend what Sheila once experienced. But another concept lurked underneath those justifications. A sad truth. Part of Sheila wanted more than simply relief. Part of her desired vengeance. The realization sent shivers down her spine. Instead of backing away, she leaned further into the experience. For the first time in a long time, she felt empowered. It seemed as if she had power over something. Control was something Sheila had always desired. Across town, Taylor sat contentedly with a book in her hands, ignorant of the storm developing in someone else's head. The night felt peaceful, safe, but danger was slowly approaching. Sheila understood she couldn't act on impulse. She needed to be patient, careful. One misstep might ruin everything. So she waited. As she waited, the line between fury and action became thinner. Sheila assured herself there was still time to change her mind. She could still walk away from this route. But every time she considered allowing Taylor to continue living her wonderful life, the wrath returned stronger than before. Sheila realized she was losing the mental war. The question was no longer whether she despised Taylor enough to contemplate something dreadful. The question was whether anything could prevent her from going ahead with it. Because the more Sheila considered it, the more it seemed inevitable. The anger had become out of control. The obsession is too great. And Sheila was a lady who rarely let morality or consequences stand in the way of doing what she thought was right. The darkness within her had completely awakened. Sheila had already crossed the threshold at which ideas may become acts. Taylor was still unaware that someone had reached that point. She kept trusting the world around her. She believed that the dangers of the past had been overcome. But she was mistaken. Because Sheila was standing in the shadows, her thoughts focused on a single scary purpose. She'd lost control. If nothing changes soon, Taylor's life could be in jeopardy.